that social networks like Facebook have many advantages to them. My opponent's secondary claims were that social networks allow people to interact with each other instead of creating antisocial people. Secondly, he stated that social networks introduce people to a beneficial form of communication. Lastly, he stated that social networking is advantageous because it keeps people in touch. Thus, I'm here to prove that social networking sites like Facebook have disadvantages that can ultimately lead users to social endangerment. My three major claims are that social networking sites like Facebook influence antisocial behavior from users. Secondly, social networking sites are not a beneficial form of communication because they give a false sense of communication and expose the personal lives of its users, which ultimately can lead to identity theft. Lastly, my final claim will be that social networking sites fail to establish stable connections with other online social network users. So my first secondary claim is that social networking sites like Facebook influence users to become antisocial. Although Christian's first main claim was that social networking sites allow people to interact with other users, there wasn't sufficient evidence to support this claim, and he focused on how social networks help develop the creative technological skills of users. He stated that researchers in the Digital Youth Project conducted a study, and after looking at more than 5,000 hours of online observations, they found that the digital world is creating new opportunities for the young people to grapple with social norms, explore interests, develop technical skills, and work on new forms of self-expression. However, because so much of their time is invested in updating their statuses, customizing their wallpapers, music, or uploading photos on their social profiles, this explains why users become antisocial. So social network users become antisocial because they lose the interaction of speech with other individuals, and thus their verbal communication weakens, making them uncomfortable and insecure during personal conversations. According to the Researchpedia, excessive time spent on social networking sites causes some individuals to experience withdrawal symptoms. They retreat from actual interaction with fellow humans and assume a virtual persona. Common signs are anxiety, distress, boredom, loneliness, like a typical addiction. In fact, the Researchpedia analysis also conveyed that face-to-face interaction and socializing becomes a burden to the addict. In extreme cases, interactions with close friends and family also stops and is substituted by virtual communication. In addition, the Mental Health Foundation released a report called The Lonely Society. It surveyed that 53% of 18 to 34-year-olds had felt depressed because of loneliness, compared with just 32% of people over 55. Why? Because nearly a third of young people said they spent too much time communicating online and not enough in person. Further, my second claim is that social networking sites are not a beneficial form of communication because they give a false sense of communication and expose the personal lives of its users, which ultimately can lead to identity theft. Christian stated that social networks are a beneficial form of communication. Social networks are beneficial communication tools because they allow people to effectively communicate regardless of the distance apart. All a person needs is a computer with internet or even a phone that can access most of the social networking sites based on its capability. Although this point is correct, my opponent forgot to mention the technical issues that can delay or create problems while video chatting. For instance, according to Michael Guerrero, video conferencing requires internet connection and therefore suffers irregular problems such as lag if bandwidth usage is too high, and this causes the conference member to have to repeat themselves constantly. If people are misheard or body language is misread during a communication, these issues can lead to personal problems. Video chatting is not a beneficial form of communication since it diminishes a feeling of trust and emotion between two people who are conferencing. Lifestyle Lounge states that the most glaring disadvantage of social networking sites is the risk of identity theft and fraud. The personal information of users can be used by dubious people for illegal activities. Information like email address, name, location, age can be used to commit crime. With a 13% increase in identity fraud in 2010 to 2011, a study conducted by Juggling Strategy and Research showed that consumers are putting themselves at risk for social media theft. 68% of people with social media profiles like Facebook or Twitter share their birthdays, with 45% being specific about the day, month, and year. 63% shared where they attended high school, 18% shared their phone number, and 12% shared their pets' names. These are all typical details asked when verifying an identity or passwords. Also, the Federal Bureau of Investigation conveys that once personal information is posted to a social networking site, it is no longer private. The more info you post, the more vulnerable you may become. My final claim states that social networking sites fail to establish stable connections with their online network users. More than keeping in touch with Facebook friends, users become obsessed with comparing and witnessing the adventures their friends have as they take pictures and report their lives on to the social networks. Although people who just met and lost relatives are able to connect through social networks like Facebook, no intimate or sincere relationship is created because of the short messages or statuses that are unable to portray genuine emotions compared to a personal conversation where the individual's feelings are apparent. Vernon City's research carried out by David Holmes, a psychologist at Manchester Metropolitan University, estimated that up to 40% of the information posted on social networking sites could be fabricated. He states that in this status update culture, we don't really live experiences. We live to report them. We're editing ourselves rather than being ourselves, alienating not only yourself but ultimately from those around you. Rather than having a genuine encounter, your friends become your audience and you're someone else's audience. Therefore, social networking sites like Facebook have disadvantages that can ultimately lead users to social endangerments due to the fact that social networking sites like Facebook influence antisocial behavior from users. Social networking sites are not a beneficial form of communication because they give a false sense of communication and expose the lives of its users, which ultimately can lead to identity theft. And lastly, social networking sites fail to establish stable connections with other online social networking users. Thank you.
All right, I will point out that it's 3 minutes over time, so there's a lot of information that would be included. If we were in a debate, which is what we're going to be doing at the end of the term, we're going to cut everybody off at a particular point, and you need to edit yourself and figure out what's the most essential argument to make on each issue, because I think you need to get to the point. Also, I think that you have a tendency to read too much, and so you want to be careful about that. All of your arguments largely consist of counterclaims, and the counterclaims are well developed. I thought you had good evidence on those points. I didn't think that you said much about the advocate's argument or the advocate's evidence, except that you kind of repeated some of it. On the first point, you told us what the advocate said and what their evidence was, but you never responded to that evidence. You never challenged the reasoning that they were using. You presented your own counterclaims, which is fine, but why are you telling us what all their evidence was if you're never going to talk about that evidence? That doesn't make much sense. If you're just going to present the counterclaim and use that as the response, stick to that particular point. If there's a reason for talking about the evidence, which I think there often is, then you need to talk about the evidence that the advocate presented. Like I said, I thought you had some good information on the face-to-face interaction and how important that is. There's some generic stuff there about how people are lonely or not lonely based on their interaction. Some big inferential leaps are being made there, but in the context of this argument, I suppose that you're going to have to make some of those sorts of things. The technology issues on the second point, I don't, it's perfectly legitimate to point them out. I don't know how frequently they occur. I don't know how important they are to the success or failure of online relationships or the ability to do those things. The trust issue, I think, is an interesting one, that people, in fact, are taking a risk there. That, I think, is a good general counterclaim on the claim of fact that the advocates presented presenting here. And I think that, like I said, you develop it pretty well. Although, once again, there's not really an analysis of the advocate's argument on this point. And then, the social comparison thing. Actually, I thought that the material on the third point, the one that you're doing right at the end when you're running out of time, is the more interesting argument about why these social media don't really function for relationships, because they aren't really about meeting people, understanding them, exchanging emotional things. It's about social comparison and look what I've done, and people are in a hurry to post, like apparently right now. That sort of thing. All right.